that a person who has the ability to say the Shahada, but he refuses to say the Shahada, then that person is a kafir, inwardly and outwardly. Inwardly and outwardly, he is a kafir, the one who refuses to utter the Shahada, because that is how you enter into Islam. He refuses to utter the Shahada, then that person is a kafir. That is what the Salaf have mentioned, and the masses of the scholars, they have all mentioned that. The hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, العهد الذي بيننا وبينهم الصلاة فمن تركها فقد كفر وفي رواية فقد أشرك. That the covenant between us and them, the barrier between us and them is the prayer between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. So whoever abandons the prayer has committed kufr, and in one narration has committed shirk. That seems to be a blatant and clear narration. The one who abandons the prayer has committed kufr. So that's why many of the Salaf, they took that opinion.
وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. So coming on to this section at the end of Usool-Us-Sunnah of Al-Humaydi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَلَا نُكَفِّرُ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الذُّنُوبِ إِنَّمَا الْكُفْرُ في ترك الخمس التي قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بني الإسلام على خمس: شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وصوم رمضان وحج البيت. فأما ثلاث منها فلا يناظر تاركها: من لم يتشهد ولم يصلي ولم يصم، لأنه لا يؤخر شيء من هذا عن وقته، ولا يجزئ من قضاه بعد تفريطه فيه عامدا عن وقته. فأما الزكاة فمتى ما أداها أجزأت عنه وكان آثما في الحبس. وأما الحج فمن وجب عليه ووجد السبيل إليه وجب عليه، ولا يجب عليه في عامه ذلك حتى لا يكون له منه بد. متى أداه كان مؤديا ولم يكن آثما في تأخيره إذا أداه، كما كان عاثما في الزكاة، لأن الزكاة حق لمسلمين مساكين حبسه عليهم فكان آثما حتى وصل إليهم. وأما الحج فكان فيما بينه وبين ربه، إذا أداه فقد أدى، وإن هو مات وهو واجد مستطيع ولم يحج سأل الرجعة إلى الدنيا أن يحج، ويجب لأهله أن يحجوا عنه، ونرجو أن يكون ذلك مؤديا عنه كما لو كان عليه دين فقضي عنه بعد موته. In this section now then, Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi says, so we do not declare anyone to be a kafir due to any sins they commit. All of that section we discussed in detail before. He says, declaring someone to be upon kufr is only in the abandonment of the 5 pillars that the Prophet ﷺ said about them, that Islam is built upon 5. The testimony that none has the right to be worshipped in truth except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and the establishment of the prayer, and the giving of the zakat, and the fasting of Ramadan, and the Hajj to the house of Allah. He then says, as for 3 of them, then no need to argue with anyone who abandons them, meaning there's no issue or argument over the one who abandons 3 of them, and that is the shahada, the prayer, and the fasting. Whoever doesn't do the shahada or pray or fast, because those things cannot be delayed from their due time, and they will not count for the person who does them after their time has gone by due to his laziness for the prayer and the fasting. As for the zakat, even if a person is late, as long as he gives it, it will count, but he will be a sinner for having delayed giving the zakat. And as for the Hajj, if it's obligatory upon him and he finds the means to do so and he's capable, then it's an obligation to do it. And it's not obligatory upon him in that specific year until there is a situation where he has no way out. So whenever he performs that Hajj, it's done, it counts, and he is not considered a sinner for delaying it, for not doing it 1 year but then doing it a later year. So he wouldn't be a sinner in that, unlike the zakat where you are a sinner if you delay it past the year, because the zakat is the right of the poor Muslims. As for the Hajj, then that is between him and his Lord. So if he performs that, then it's done, and if he dies and he was capable but he didn't perform it, he would request to come back to the dunya to do it. But his family, they perform it on his behalf, and the Shaykh says, or the author says, Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi, that we hope that will count for him, just like if he had a debt and somebody then paid off the debt on his behalf. So now then, in this section, Al-Imam Al-Humaydi clarifies his opinion on this issue regarding the one who abandons any one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The 5 pillars of Islam that are, of course, agreed upon. Anybody who abandons one of the 5 pillars of Islam, what is the ruling on them? Al-Imam Al-Humaydi talks about that in this section. With regards to it, with regards to this topic of the 5 pillars of Islam, there are certain things that are agreed upon by the scholars, and there are certain things that are differed over. As for what is agreed upon, محل الاتفاق الشهادتان, the shahada. فمن تركهما مع القدرة على الإتيان بهما فإنه يكفر. So whoever abandons the shahadatain, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, whoever abandons them with the ability to be upon them and to say them, whoever abandons them, then he is certainly a kafir by agreement of the scholars. By agreement, the one who abandons the shahadatain with the ability to be upon them and state them, then he is a kafir. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said, فَأَمَّا الشَّهَادَتَانِ إِذَا لَمْ يَتَكَلَّمْ بِهَا مَعَ الْقُدْرَةِ فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ بَاطِنًا وَظَاهِرًا عند سلف الأمة وأئمتها وجماهير علمائها. That a person who has the ability to say the shahada, but he refuses to say the shahada, then that person is a kafir, inwardly and outwardly. Inwardly and outwardly he is a kafir, the one who refuses to utter the shahada, because that is how you enter into Islam. He refuses to utter the shahada, then that person is a kafir. That is what the Salaf have mentioned, and the masses of the scholars, they have all mentioned that. That is agreed upon. As for the other 4 pillars, they are all differed over. Meaning if a person abandons any one of the other four pillars, are they kafir or not? That is differed over. وأما محل الاختلاف فهي بقية الأركان الأربعة والخلاف فيها في من تركها كسلا وتهاونا أما من تركها أو ترك أحدها جاحدا الوجوب والفرضية مستكبرا عن ذلك وليس ثمة مانع فإنه كافر بالإجماع. So with the 5 pillars of Islam, whoever abandons the Shahada, kafir by agreement of the scholars. Whoever abandons one of the other 4, there's a difference of opinion. But remember too, the difference of opinion is about a person who abandons one of the other 4 out of laziness. As for the one who abandons any one of the other 4 due to rejection of them, then he's a kafir by agreement too. If anybody rejects any one of the other 4 pillars, he abandons them due to his rejection of them. That is kufr. So that isn't the problem. That isn't any difference of opinion. The difference of opinion is somebody who accepts them, doesn't reject them, but out of laziness doesn't perform them, one of the other 4 pillars. Then what is the ruling on that person who has abandoned one of the other 4 pillars out of laziness? That is where the difference of opinion is. Al-Imaam Ibn Qudama, he mentioned in his book Al-Mughni, when he spoke about the one who abandons the prayer, لا خلاف بين أهل العلم في كفر من تركها جاحدا لوجوبها. That there is no difference between the scholars that a person who abandons the prayer due to rejecting it is a kafir. No difference between the scholars on that. إذا كان ممن لا يجهل مثله ذلك, as long as he is somebody who typically from his background it would not be expected for him to be ignorant of that affair, meaning he is somebody who would know about the prayer, he knows about the prayer, he knows about Islam and the need to pray 5 times a day, he knows that much. He's not somebody from the middle of the Amazon rainforest and then he rejects the prayer. That's a different situation. But somebody who knows, and it is expected of him and of his likes to know about the obligation of the prayer, and so he abandons it out of rejection, that is kufr. فإن كان ممن لا يعرف الوجوب كحديث الإسلام والناشئ بغير دار الإسلام أو بادية بعيدة عن الأمصار وأهل العلم لم يحكم بكفره. But as for the one who, for example, is brand new to Islam, just became Muslim, doesn't even know the proper rulings of prayer and things like that, or somebody who lives in some faraway place away from the lands of the Muslims, or some deserted faraway place in the jungles or wherever it might be, far away from the people of knowledge, far away from the lands of Islam, and that kind of person rejects it, then you don't automatically declare that to be kufr. That is then going to be a situation that needs to be looked into further. You then have to give him da'wah and explain to him that you don't understand. Prayer is one of the pillars of Islam and these are the rulings and this is the evidence. You have to teach that kind of person. وَنُثْبَتْ لَهُ أو تثبت له أدلة وجوبها, and you affirm and establish the evidences for the obligation of the prayer to him. فإن جحدها بعد ذلك كفر. After all of that, if he then still rejects it, then you declare that to be kufr. وأما إذا كان جاحدا أو الجاحد لها ناشئا في الأمصار بين أهل العلم فإنه يكفر بمجرد جحدها وكذلك الحكم في مباني الإسلام كلها. As for a person who has grown up in the kind of environment where you would expect, of course, they understand these basics. They grew up in a Muslim country. You grew up in a Muslim country, of course you know about the 5 daily prayers. Or even you grew up in a place, even in these countries that are non-Muslim, but with Muslims and access to knowledge and information, even the kuffar, they know about these prayers that we do every day, and they seen the videos and they see all types of things. Even they know these actions that we do. So a Muslim, even in these kinds of lands, obviously knows. You go to any Muslim on the street, the worst drug dealer, but he was born in a Muslim family, you ask him, he'll tell you, yes, I know there's 5 prayers every day. So in these kinds of environments where the people know that basic concept, they know about the 5 daily prayers, they know about fasting in Ramadan, they know about zakat, they know about hajj. You could go to the drug dealer on the street who was born in a Muslim family, he'll know about those things. He'll know, yes, hajj and fasting, Ramadan and these things, they know. So in these kinds of instances where that basic knowledge exists, but they reject these pillars, they reject them and refuse to accept them, disbelieve in them, then that is kufr. That is kufr. They know about them, they understand them, they recognize them, but they still reject them. That is kufr in that case. وأدلة وجوبها لا تكاد تخفى إذا كان الكتاب والسنة مشحونين بأدلتها. And of course there are multiple evidences in the Quran and the Sunnah about the 5 pillars of Islam. Al-Hafiz ibn Hubayra, he mentioned, واتفقوا على أن من امتنع من الزكاة مستحلا لذلك غير معتقد لوجوبها أنه كافر. That a person who refuses to give the zakat, believing it to be permissible for him to refuse and rejecting the obligation of the zakat and not believing in it, that is kufr. That is kufr. He's a kafir. Again, in the same context of somebody who knows that basic knowledge. إذن الجحود منوط بهذا التفصيل. So the one who rejects any of those other 4 pillars of Islam is declared as a kafir if he has the background where it is expected in that background he knows about these pillars of Islam. Whereas middle of the Amazon rainforest or some other place far away from the Muslim lands, or some place far away from the Muslims or the scholars, and they have no idea what's going on. There are places in the world now, Muslim communities. They call themselves Muslims. They do the Eid prayer. And yet I've been told in those places the Muslims don't even properly know anything about fasting and about 5 daily prayers and zakat, and they have no idea. It's been completely lost. But their forefathers, there was Islam. But now the environment has become such that these people have completely lost knowledge of what's going on. So maybe in that kind of situation it's different. But all these rulings, we're talking about a situation where the knowledge, the basic knowledge exists. That basic understanding exists. And if a person rejects any of the other pillars in that case, in that environment, then that person is a kafir then. أما الفرائض الأربع فإذا جحد وجوب شيء منها بعد بلوغ الحجة فهو كافر. وأما مع الإقرار بالوجوب إذا ترك شيء من هذه الأركان الأربعة ففي التكفير أقوال للعلماء. So now then the other situation. Somebody who doesn't reject any of these pillars, doesn't reject them, believes in them, accepts them, knows, but he's not performing them out of laziness. This is where the real difference of opinion comes in now. So one of the opinions in regards to this, أحدها من أقوال العلماء, from the statements of the scholars, أنه يكفر بترك واحد من الأربعة حتى الحج. that a person out of laziness, if he abandons any one of these other four, Shahada, no difference of opinion, kafir. But the prayer, zakat, hajj, fasting, if a person out of laziness abandons one of these other four, any one of these other four, some of the scholars say that is kufr. وإن كان في جواز تأخيره نزاع بين العلماء فمتى عزم على تركه بالكلية كفر. So some of the scholars have this opinion. Anybody out of laziness abandons the prayer or the fasting or the zakat or the hajj, abandons it, then that person out of laziness is a kafir. How can you abandon hajj though? Meaning a person knows he's supposed to do hajj once in the lifetime, but he makes the intention, I'm not going to bother, forget it, I'm never going to go. He accepts that it's an obligation, but he makes the intention, I'm never going to go, forget it. So now he has abandoned hajj, despite accepting its obligation. He's made the intention to abandon it. As for zakat, you physically abandon that. 1 year goes by and you don't give your zakat. As for fasting, you physically abandon that. Ramadan comes and you don't fast. Prayer, you physically abandon that. 5 times a day, time comes and you don't pray. But hajj, technically you can't physically abandon it, because some of the scholars have the opinion, if you're capable of hajj, you're healthy, you have the money, do you have to do it that year? Imagine previously I didn't have the money. I had health. I had my health, but I didn't have money in the past. And this year now, alhamdulillah, Allah blessed me with money. So now I've got wealth and I've got money this year. Does hajj become an obligation upon me this year right now then? Or can I say, okay, I've got my health, I've got money as well now, I'll just keep it aside, I'll go next year with the money. Is that permissible? Is it permissible to delay hajj once you have fulfilled the requirements to be able to go? Or are you allowed to still delay it till a later year, even after you have fulfilled the requirements to be able to go? You're healthy, you got money, but you think, I'm just going to go next year or the year after. Is it allowed or not to delay hajj? Difference of opinion between the scholars. Some scholars say, as soon as you fulfill the requirements, you have your health, you have your wealth, you have the means to go, then it's an obligation to go that year. Others, they say, once you have fulfilled the requirements, you got enough money put aside now, you're healthy, you got the means, you got your visa, whatever, but it's an extended visa, you think, okay, it's a 5-year visa, I'm going to go next year. Permissible, some scholars say. It's not an obligation to go that very year. So based upon that opinion where it's permissible to delay, once you fulfill the requirements, it's still permissible to delay, then technically you can't be physically missing the hajj, because it's allowed to do it the year after. So in that case, they say, if a person makes the intention that he's going to miss it, this year, next year, he's going to miss it. He makes the intention, he's not going to go. Then that is now abandoning hajj out of laziness. So one opinion of the scholars is, anybody who abandons any one of the other 4 pillars out of laziness, kafir. That is the opinion of some of the scholars. The second opinion, أنه لا يكفر بترك شيء من ذلك مع الإقرار بالوجوب. That a person who doesn't reject any of those things, accepts all 4 of these other pillars, along with the shahada of course, accepts them all, but just out of laziness misses whichever ones. The second opinion is, there is no kufr in this circumstance. Somebody who accepts these other 4 pillars and misses any one of them out of laziness, there is no kufr that gets involved here. You don't declare a person to be a kafir if they miss any of the other pillars out of laziness, basically. So he could miss the prayer out of laziness, we don't rule upon him as a kafir. He could miss the zakat, abandon it, or the hajj or the fasting out of laziness, we don't declare kufr upon him in any case, if he has abandoned it out of laziness only, but accepts the obligation in his heart. No kufr. That is the second opinion. And that is an opinion which is widespread amongst the fuqaha. Widespread among the fuqaha. from the companions of Abu Hanifa, Al-Imaam Malik, Al-Imaam Abu Hanifa, Al-Imaam Shafi'i. It's also narrated from Al-Imaam Ahmad. So many of the scholars have this opinion that if somebody abandons any of the other four pillars out of laziness only, that isn't going to be kufr. We don't declare that person to be kafir. The third opinion, if a person abandons the fasting out of laziness, or the zakat out of laziness, or just a desire not to give it, or whatever it may be, or the hajj out of laziness, none of those three are a declaration of kufr upon him. But if he abandons the prayer out of laziness, kafir. That's the third opinion. That it's only kufr in regards to the prayer, not the fasting, the zakat, or the hajj. This is also narrated from Al-Imam Ahmad as an opinion. Many of the Salaf had this opinion, that the prayer is different to the other three. You abandon the prayer out of laziness, kufr. Contrary to the other three, as opposed to the other three. The fourth opinion is a person who abandons the prayer or abandons zakat, kafir. But not if he abandons fasting or hajj. So think about these four opinions. The first opinion was anybody who abandons any one of the other four pillars out of laziness, kafir. You can make that declaration, that applies, that comes into it. Second opinion, complete opposite. Anybody who misses any one of these other four obligations out of laziness, there's no such thing as kufr coming into the issue. No declaration of kufr. Third opinion was only on the prayer the issue of kufr comes in, according to them, on the third opinion, not fasting, zakat, or hajj. The fourth opinion, the one who abandons the prayer, just like opinion 3, but also if he abandons zakat. He could pray 5 prayers a day, but if he abandons the zakat, the issue of kufr comes into that as well. That's the fourth opinion. The fifth opinion is the same as the fourth opinion, prayer and zakat, but with one difference. They say the one who abandons the prayer and abandons the zakat, and the Imam fights them over it. Just like it happened at the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, fought those people who abandoned the zakat. They say if it gets to that level, then yes, the Imam is now fighting, the ruler of the Muslims is now fighting against them over it. Now the issue of kufr is coming in against them. So they say it's only in that circumstance. So opinion 4 and 5 are very similar. It's about the prayer and the zakat. But opinion 5 puts it down to the situation where the Imam, the ruler of the Muslims, actually goes out and fights them over it. So now the issue of kufr comes in on them. So you can see there are a few different opinions there regarding the other 4 pillars of Islam and whether the issue of kufr comes in or not. The second opinion appears to be a very widespread opinion, that none of those other 4 are kufr. I mean, most of the scholars are only going to talk about prayer really as the main thing. Zakat does come into it quite a lot as well, but not as much as prayer. The discussion of the scholars mostly is over the issue of the prayer. Mostly. If you had to narrow it down, when you narrow everything down, you'd end up at the issue of the prayer as the head main issue. The one who abandons the prayer out of laziness, are they kafir or are they not? So that's where you get the main difference of opinion. A lot of scholars, they have the opinion no, opinion number 2. And there are some scholars, some of the Salaf, they have opinion 1. The person who abandons the prayer is a kafir. And there are evidences, of course, clear evidences about that. The hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, العهد الذي بيننا وبينهم الصلاة فمن تركها فقد كفر وفي رواية فقد أشرك. That the covenant between us and them, the barrier between us and them is the prayer between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. So whoever abandons the prayer has committed kufr, and in one narration has committed shirk. That seems to be a blatant and clear narration. The one who abandons the prayer has committed kufr. So that's why many of the Salaf, they took that opinion regarding the one who abandons the prayer, that they have committed kufr. Al-Hafiz Al-Sabuni, Al-Imaam Al-Sabuni, in his famous book Aqeedatu Salafi Ashab al-Hadith, he said under the chapter Hukmu Tariki Salati Amdan, the ruling on a person who abandons the prayer on purpose. Because when you do it out of laziness, you're doing it on purpose. You're being lazy, you know what you're doing, you know you're missing the prayer, you know the time is about to finish and you don't get up and pray. You've done it on purpose. Laziness, yes, but on purpose. He said, اختلف أهل الحديث في ترك المسلم صلاة الفرض متعمدا. That the scholars, they differed over a person who abandons the prayer on purpose, meaning out of laziness. Not on purpose because he rejects it, because that one there's no difference of opinion, kafir. But he abandons it on purpose out of laziness. He's lazy, he knows the time is going, gone. He never bothered to get up, he didn't bother to pray on purpose. That's on purpose. He could have got up and done it, he didn't. So the scholars, they differed over this situation. فكفره بذلك أحمد بن حنبل وجماعة من علماء السلف. So scholars like Ahmad ibn Hanbal declared that person to be kafir. And a group of the scholars of the Salaf, they declared that person to be kafir. And they used that hadith, بين العبد والشرك ترك الصلاة فمن ترك الصلاة فقد كفر. That between a servant and shirk is the abandonment of the prayer. So whoever abandons the prayer has committed kufr. But some of the scholars like Al-Imaam Shafi'i and others from the Salaf as well, they took the opinion that if a person abandons the prayer, believing it's an obligation, not the one who rejects it, believing it's an obligation, and he abandons it out of laziness, we don't declare him to be a kafir. لا يكفر به, as long as he believes and recognizes the obligation of the prayer, so he's only missed it out of laziness. إنما يستوجب القتل كما يستوجبه المرتد عن الإسلام. They said though, even though we don't declare him to be a kafir, but you tell the person to pray. If he refuses, he is to be killed. Capital punishment is the punishment, they say. Capital punishment. Just like somebody who apostates. وتأول الخبر من ترك الصلاة جاحدا كما أخبر سبحانه عن يوسف. نعم. And then Al-Imaam Ibn Abd al-Barr said, أن تارك الصلاة كسلا وتهاونا بغير جحود أنه مؤمن ناقص الإيمان. A person who abandons the prayer out of laziness, not because he rejects it, he is a believer, but he is deficient in his iman. The one who doesn't pray out of laziness, believes in it, knows it, but doesn't pray out of laziness, then he is a believer still, but deficient in his iman. Clearly deficient in his iman. The third issue here that was mentioned by Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi. So that was the issue of the 5 pillars and the differences of the scholars on declaring a person a kafir or not, if you abandon one of them or not. The third issue here was where Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi said, as for three of the pillars, there is no need to even open up the topic. It's clear. Kufr. And he was talking about the one who abandons the Shahada, the one who doesn't pray, the one who doesn't fast. يريد رحمه الله بهذه العبارة أن هذه الأركان الثلاثة من التشهد والصلاة والصيام يجب على المسلم أن يلتزمها ويأتي بها ولا يسقط أو تسقط عنه بحال إلا من عذر. هذا بالنسبة للصلاة والصيام بخلاف بقية الأركان من الزكاة والحج، فإن الواجب على كل مؤمن أن يؤمن بوجوب الزكاة والحج وأنهما من أركان الإسلام ومبانيه العظام، لكن لا يجب على كل أحد أن يقوم بها إلا من توفرت في حقه شروطها، أي شروط وجوب الزكاة وشروط وجوب الحج. أما من لم تجب عليه بمعنى لم تتوافر فيه شروط الموجبة لها فإنه لا يجب عليه أن يأتي بهما لسقوطها عنه، لكن يبقى أنه يجب عليه وجوبا أن يعتقد فرضيتها وأنها من أركان الإسلام. What Al-Imam Al-Humaydi meant, as Shaykh Al-Bukhari explains here, what he meant about the statement where he said three of these five pillars there's nothing to discuss. Not necessarily that he took the opinion that they are kafir if they abandon any of those three. As Shaykh Al-Bukhari actually says, what he actually intended by that is that those three, the shahada, the prayer and the fasting, are an obligation instantly upon everyone. Everyone who has shahada, everyone has to do that. Prayer, it's an obligation on everyone. Fasting, it's an obligation on everyone, unless you have the exemptions. It's an obligation by default, unless you have the exemption, you're sick or you're traveling, those are exemptions. But it's an obligation by default on everybody. Whereas the zakat, is it an obligation by default on everybody? It's not. It's only an obligation if you have the right amount of money, the threshold of money or wealth. Only if you have the threshold of the wealth it becomes an obligation, otherwise it's not. Hajj, obligation on everybody. Same again, only if you have the ability and the means and the threshold or the amount of wealth needed, only then it becomes an obligation. So those two, it's a bit different. Whereas the first three, where he says nothing to discuss in these, meaning by default, they are an obligation on everybody. That's what Shaykh al-Bukhari says he meant by that. Not the issue of takfir. الوجه الرابع قوله لأنه لا يؤخر شيء من هذا عن وقته. Because Al-Imam Al-Humaydi, he explained that those first three, you cannot delay them. Shahada, you can't say, okay, I'll take the Shahada later. You're a kafir then until you do. The prayer, you can't delay that. The time of the prayer is the time. You can't go past the time, outside of the time. Fasting, Ramadan is Ramadan. You can't just miss it on purpose and say, I'm just going to do it afterwards. Those three cannot go outside of their time. Whereas zakat, even if it was an obligation on you, it could go out of its time, but you would be a sinner. It would still count. You give it late, it would still count, but you'd be a sinner. But if you miss the prayer time on purpose, then you think, okay, let me do it. Now if you pray, many of the scholars, they say your prayer doesn't count. You miss the time on purpose. You miss Ramadan on purpose, and then afterwards you say, okay, let me do it now. It doesn't count. You missed it on purpose in the month where it's obligated. So in those ones, no discussion. But in these ones, zakat, it's possible to delay it and you would be a sinner, but it would count. Hajj, again, there's a difference of opinion anyway. Some say it's allowed to delay it anyway. The fifth thing mentioned here is connected to that. لا يجزئ من قضاه بعد تفريطه فيه عامدا عن وقته. That those first three, or the prayer and the fasting, if anybody delays either of those two on purpose until the time finishes, then afterwards he thinks, okay, let me do it now, it won't count. That will not cover you. You are considered as having abandoned that prayer in that time, abandoned the fasting of that day or that year. You've gone outside of the time, you cannot make it up outside of the time. That is, of course, if it goes outside of the allotted time. Like dhuhr now, these days it starts maybe, I don't know, 1:30 or something, and it carries on all the way till maybe 5:30, 6 o'clock until Asr starts. So you're allowed to pray any time. Somebody prays all the way at 4:30, that counts. That's okay, it's in the time. But somebody misses it all the way until Asr time comes in, now you've gone outside of the time. So that's what he mentions here in the 6th point about the zakat. فَأَمَّا الزَّكَاةِ فَمَتَى مَا أَدَّاهَا أَجْزَأَتْ عَنْهُ وَكَانَ آثِمًا فِي الْحَبْسِ. That whenever he gives the zakat, it would count, but he would be a sinner for having delayed giving that zakat. And as for the Hajj, وَأَمَّا الْحَجْ فَمَنْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ وَوَجَدَ السَّبِيلَ إِلَيْهِ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ حَتَّى لَا يَكُونَ لَهُ مِنْهُ بُدٌّ مَتَى أَدَّاهُ كَانَ مُؤَدِّيًا. So this is about the 6th, or the issue here is about the Hajj. And again, he says when the Hajj is obligatory upon a person and he has the means to go, then whenever he performs that Hajj, whenever that is done, then it would count and it would be permissible for that person. ولا يجب عليه في عامه ذلك حتى لا يكون له منه بد. That it doesn't necessarily have to be in that year. And this is the issue we talked about. The Shaykh is going to give some explanation on that. One of the opinions about that is يجب أداء الحج على الفور لمن وجب عليه وتوفرت شرائطه فيه. That as long as or whenever your requirements are fulfilled, you've got enough money, you got your health, you got your visa available, everything, then you have to go that year. That is one opinion. The second opinion is that it's not an obligation that immediate year. You could have the money now and you think to yourself, okay, let me just save it. I'm going to save it. I'm a bit preoccupied this year, it's a bit difficult. I'm just going to save the money and I'll use it next year and go next year. Permissible. According to the second opinion, permissible. That is okay. There is no harm in delaying the Hajj till the following year because it's an obligation once in the lifetime. So you're still alive. Obviously you don't know if you're going to be alive the next year, but you're alive for now and your intention is to go the next year. And so the scholars, they say that's okay as well according to that opinion. And according to that opinion then, لَمْ يَكُنْ آثِمًا فِي تَأْخِيرِهِ. That person would not be considered a sinner for delaying it. The one who says, I'll just save the money and go next year or in some future year. Permissible, and you wouldn't be considered a sinner for doing that. Whereas the zakat, a person is considered a sinner because there you are holding back the rights of the poor. Whereas with the Hajj, it's the rights between yourself and Allah. With zakat, you're holding back the money that the poor people should be getting now. It's their right, it's not your money anymore. So that's why you're a sinner for delaying the zakat, but with the Hajj it's permissible at any time, according to that second opinion. And then at the end, the last thing that he mentions is about somebody doing the Hajj on behalf of their family member. يجب لأهله أن يحجوا عنه ونرجو أن يكون ذلك مؤديا عنه كما لو كان عليه دين فقضي عنه بعد موته. That if a person died and he hadn't done Hajj, then the family member, a family member or anybody can do that Hajj on behalf of that person, and that would be considered as fulfilling the obligation, just like if that person had a debt and one of the family members then pays off that person's debt, the one who died and left a debt. The evidences for this are in the hadith, in the hadith of Al-Bukhari, the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, that a woman أن امرأة من جهينة جاءت إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالت إن أمي نذرت أن تحج فلم تحج حتى ماتت أفأحج عنها؟ قال نعم حجي عنها. أرأيت لو كان على أمك دين كنت قاضيته؟ اقضوا الله فالله أحق بالوفاء. A woman from Juhayna, that tribe, came to the messenger and said that my mother had vowed to do Hajj, but she died and didn't do Hajj. Should I do it on her behalf? Messenger said, yes, do the Hajj on her behalf. Do you not see that if your mother had died with a debt, wouldn't you have paid that debt off for her? Then fulfill the debts to Allah. Allah is more deserving that you fulfill His debts. Meaning that mother died with the debt of having to do Hajj. She had vowed to do it, in fact. So it's a debt that needs to be fulfilled, and that Hajj needs to be done on their behalf. So how is that normally done? Normally, if a person dies, from the money they leave behind, their inheritance they leave behind, you take the money out from that. Take the money out from their inheritance they leave behind for the inheritors. Take the money out from that to be able to send someone to go do Hajj on their behalf. That's normally how it's done. And there are some other opinions about how that money is taken as well, but that is the opinion of the scholars mostly on that. So the scholars, they give different opinions about how the money is taken from the wealth of the deceased. But basically, usually the scholars, they mention the wealth, the amount needed to go do Hajj, you take that out from the inheritance, put that aside, somebody's going to go do Hajj on behalf of them. The rest of the money now is split out between the inheritors. That amount for the Hajj is taken out. The rest of it is then split amongst the inheritors. And that is the final topic. That is the final section that Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi mentions there. That brings us to the end of this book, to the end of Usool-Us-Sunnah of Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi, rahimahullah ta'ala, with the explanation there of a Shaykh Abdullah ibn Abd al-Rahim al-Bukhari, hafidhahullah ta'ala. So may Allah reward our Shaykh for his explanation and reward the author for the book and the benefits within it. So that, alhamdulillah, by the blessing of Allah, is the completion of this book. Next week, as you know, there won't be a lesson. There is no lesson next week because of Eid, etc. And then the week after, we're going to start, I think the first lecture is going to be a one-off lecture on the hadith about the two hungry wolves. And then after that, we're going to start the new proper series of lessons, which is going to be a historical analysis of all the groups of bid'ah and how they emerged in Islam from those early times of the Salaf. Which groups, what were their beliefs, what were their principles, how did they deviate away from the principles of Ahl-Sunnah, going through all the groups, the Jahmiyyah, the Mu'tazila, the Shia, all of the different groups and how they arose and the history and analysis of all of it. We'll go through all of that as the next series, insha'Allah ta'ala. So we'll stop on that for today then. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.